Hey everybody, I just did an entire daily discourse without the microphone on again. So I deleted it and I'm re-recording it. But in today's daily discourse, I'm going to talk all about scope and how you can use discussions with the client about scope and putting certain things in your project documentation that will help set the proper client expectations, not only regarding scope, but also for setting proper expectations regarding roles and responsibilities, actually just laying the foundation for that, which you'll cover in more detail with them later. But remember when I talked in previous discourses about reiteration and how important that is? So even if stuff is repeated in a different way throughout your documentation and throughout your discussions with the client, that's okay, because the reiteration is how you get your point across. So let's go ahead and get started. Sometimes setting the project scope can be one of the hardest exercises in defining the project. And it's not so much that defining what's in scope is the problem, it's what's defining what's out of scope. Sometimes it's hard to remember all the things that you should maybe spell out that the client make assumptions about or whatever. Or discussions that you've had. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So I had a conversation recently with several people about this because I like to talk to other people and find out how they do things and then compare it to what I'm doing. And I actually adopted something that someone else was doing, and I'll tell you about that in a minute too. Pardon me. I'm going to take a drink of water real quick. But what he told me, or what several people told me, I said, well, how do you define scope? And he said, well, anything that's not in the contract is out of scope. Well, that's a huge amount of stuff if you think about it. That could be everything in the world. So I think it's really important to define that out of scope section. I think that's a poor way to do it because there are conversations get misremembered. I don't know, is misremembered a word? For example, let's say there's a new gym in town that needs a website. And let's say that you've done websites for other gyms before, and some of those people have wanted a way to do online booking for their personal trainers. And so you ask this client if they want that feature, and they say no. If you don't specify that as being out of scope, they could misremember what you said and think that you said, well, you included it for other people, so it would be included for this too if they wanted it, and all they had to do was say so. But that's not what you said. You asked them if they wanted it, and you forgot to put it in the out of scope section. Now, how do I know this? That's right, I did it myself. So that's why I've gotten really, fastidious about that out of scope section. Another example is that sometimes clients make assumptions. For example, if there are paid elements, like if you have to purchase a theme or you have to purchase plugins, they might assume that that's included with the price, and maybe it's not. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but you need to spell that out, I think, in the scope section. And that's an example of course, paying for plugins is within the scope of the project. But the reason that I spell it out in the scope section is because I divide my scope section into 3 sections, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But I've changed the way, I haven't done it yet, but I just found out about the way this guy displays his scope section in his documents. He uses a chart. And I had never really thought about doing it that way, but I think I'm going to start doing it that way. But I am changing it a little bit from the way he does it because I've added a 3rd column, and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, let's just do it with the whole slide. Let me move this over. There we go. Okay, and pardon me again, I've got some pollen is bothering me. The rain finally stopped in North Carolina, thank goodness. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Hold on, let's go back to the first slide there. The rain has stopped, and so therefore there's some pollen. I don't know how it happens so quickly, but that's what's irritating my throat. Give me just one second, and I apologize greatly for this. Okay. So here's how the chart looks. And now when he showed it to me, he just has an in scope and an out of scope section. I always divide the in scope section into in scope, that is my responsibility, and in scope, that is the client's responsibility. So in this example, you've got establishing or changing host accounts. And for this pretend customer, that's out of scope because they already have a hosting account. Then I'm going to install WordPress and plugins. Oh, you know what another thing this does is it allows the client to see kind of a snapshot of all the stuff you're going to be doing. So it kind of gives some extra value to what it is. You know, build a website. That is very broad. But when you break it down into all these things, they can begin to think, gee, this is a lot more involved than I thought it was. And that's not a bad thing for them to realize that. Okay, so selecting a theme, we're going to do that. Then see where I have designing the websites, both of us, because the client needs to be involved in that process, all the question asking, all the drill down into the detail and so forth. So they might not realize that that's their responsibility. And they might not realize there's a difference in designing and planning the website and building and coding the website. They may think that all happens at one time. So, pardon me. So that's why I delineate it here. Then we've got testing, where both of us are involved, training and support, which is out of scope for this project because they already have a WordPress site. This is to update their existing site. And then creating content and copywriting is their responsibility. Collecting and organizing the content is our responsibility. So I think it's really helpful to spell those things out as different things, so that they understand. And in some cases, they might be responsible for collecting and organizing the content. Although I find most of the time it's easier if I do that part. Okay, and then the rest of this list is purchasing paid elements. And for this client, if anything else comes up, because if I've got this in my scope section, I'm definitely going to spell it out later what those paid elements are and how much they're going to cost. But if something comes up later that we didn't know about, then this makes it really clear that, yes, that's still in scope, but that the client's responsible for paying for it. And in this case, logo design is out of scope because they already have one. Editing photos and videos, they're going to have to do that. We're not going to do it. We could do it, but for this project, we're not. And then search engine optimization, branding, advice, and consulting, we're going to do. And then the last four, email, social media, advertising, photography, and video production, all of those are out of scope for this project. Pardon me. So this has been a really short daily discourse, and I still hope you got something out of it, and you can see how maybe restructuring the way you talk about scope and the way you spell it out for the client in your documents can really help set those expectations up front about how things are going to operate. Oh yeah, but before I go, let me go back to the slides for 1 second, and let's move that over. I'm going to get used to this technology, I promise. Okay, so if you want to get more training, I have the scope creep tip sheet that tells you how to lay some things out in your proposal to manage scope creep from the very beginning of the project. The lesson 1 of the content collection roadmap, how to implement a content first approach, that's also free. And I have the little mini course on the 6 productivity principles for WordPress project success. And that's the foundation on which all of my training is based. And I'll tell you about that in the mini course. But these were principles that were given to me in a previous life as an IT business analyst. And I use them all the time, even on my own personal projects like tiling the kitchen. So they're very, very helpful, common sense approach to managing projects, and it applies to everything. Okay, so if you don't want those freebies, or even if you do, you might also want to join our private Facebook group. All you have to do is go to Facebook, search on WordPress Project Management under groups, or go to wproadmaps.com/my group, and it'll forward you right over to the Facebook group. And then there's a podcast and another Facebook group that I've fallen in love with that you also might want to consider. and that is the admin bar. They focus more on the business end of running a WordPress business, but they're super laid back. They've got some really interesting guests on their program, and their Facebook group is full of people who are very helpful and very engaged and asking questions and answering questions. And it's just a place I love to be. So I thought I would share it with you. And I tend to share this at the end of every one of these daily discourses so people will remember it. So thank you so much for watching my daily discourses. I hope that you got something out of it. I hope that you'll leave me a comment. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow, and I will see you soon.